Hey guys, good evening. Todd Sachs of Sachs Realty, and welcome to our 9th episode of Tuesday Night Live. And I'm really excited about this podcast because in the real estate business right now, it almost feels like pre-2008 and where things are really highly priced. Real estate is hot. It is a real seller's market. But there are checks and balances in place. And tonight, I'm really excited that I have a real estate appraiser that is going to spend the next hour with us. And as a real estate professional, it's our job to help sellers really kind of establish that selling price. It's sort of, our responsibility. And then on the buyer side, as a real estate professional, it's our job to kind of help put the offer together. And, buyers are stressed out. They're bidding higher than asking price right now, and sellers are getting it. And, what happens is at the end of the day, the buyer needs to get a mortgage in most cases. And I can pretty much guarantee you in most cases, that mortgage, that lender, that mortgage company, they're going to require a home appraisal. And that's what we have on tap tonight. So, guys, Todd Sachs of Sachs Realty. We're a boutique brokerage here in Maryland, but we help people all over the country through our preferred broker network. So if you're, watching us for the first time, if you don't have an agent, feel free to reach out to me with any of your real estate questions and needs, and be glad to help you out. So without further ado, I'd like to bring in Blaine Fha. And Blaine, he's been in a real estate appraisal business for a very long time. He's actually chief appraiser for his company and founder. And Blaine, welcome and thank you for joining us tonight.
Todd, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure, honor to be on your show. Thanks to Melissa and Joe for helping us get this all rolling.
Yes, sir. So tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, well, as you said, very kind introduction. I've been doing this now in the appraisal side for going on 20 years this year. And prior to that, I was a loan officer in the mortgage business. And then prior to that, a real estate salesperson. And prior to that, real estate investor. So I've owned commercial and residential real estate. So I like to say that I speak all the languages.
And you've done it all.
Yeah.
You're kind of like me. I haven't been in the mortgage business, but I started swinging a hammer a long, long time ago and sort of stuck with it, and certainly very passionate about this business. So really tonight, guys, we're going to talk about 4 main things. Okay. So besides everything is all going to be wrapped around what really matters most with the home appraisal. And, as far as valuing your property, we're going to take it from, number one, the site visit. What happens when, the home visit, when somebody like Blaine comes out, once a contract is sort of accepted on a property and they're going through the loan process, that home visit, and then really the comparable process. So we hear a lot, my house is worth so much more than the neighbor's house because we did all of this. And sometimes that matters. Sometimes it doesn't matter. So Blaine's going to kind of like, unfold some of these things for us. We've got a lot of questions, and you guys can send in questions too. If you have questions, go ahead and chat them to us. We'll try and get them answered. And then really, we're going to talk about the appraisal report and what happens when that appraisal comes in if it doesn't hit the numbers. We're going to discuss that. And then we're really going to give you some great tips on how to jack that value up so that you get that highest appraised value if you're the seller. That's really what you're looking for. So, Blaine, why don't you kind of take it away a little bit? So, for a lot of people, they don't really understand what the difference is between a home inspection and a home appraisal. So Can you kind of just clear that up a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So, and we get it all the time. Somebody will say, the inspector's here, and they really mean the appraiser. So we are not looking at the structure of the house per se. We're not looking for cracks in the foundation. If we see them, we'll note them in the appraisal because they may affect value. They may affect health and safety issues for FHA deals. But the inspector is going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and they are looking for structural soundness. They're looking to make sure that the electrical's up to date and up to code. They're looking at those things. Appraisers are not looking per se at code. We're looking at anything that might pertain to the valuation of the property.
Yeah. So, and they're different appraisals based on the loans that are coming in. So you had mentioned FHA. So kind of explain the difference between a conventional. I know there's a set of standards that you have, and we'll get more into the actual home visit and what you're looking for. But just briefly, the difference between loans from a conventional loan to a FHA or VA type of loan,
Yeah,
they want you to check for certain additional things, right? So
that's right.
you just kind of go over that.
Yeah, you bet. So FHA, VA, basically any government backs a loan, typically it's going to be denoted by a low down payment. So FHA, VA, rural development, those kinds of loans where there's some kind of assistance or really low down payment, and then FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, is going to back the loan or guarantee it. They want us to go a little bit deeper. And they want us to call out anything that may affect health and safety. So the most common one that most people know about is chipping and peeling paint. There's a special year that they want us to look for. It's 1978. Basically, before 1978, they were putting lead in the paint. People would eat the paint chips, and then you'd have health issues. But really, even after 1978, if an underwriter sees chipping, peeling paint, bare wood, anything like that, they look at that and say, yeah, you know what? This is going to depreciate the house quicker over time because the bare wood, it's not protected from the elements. So they want us to look at that. Any holes in flooring, any nails sticking up, any outlet covers or light switch covers that aren't on where somebody could stick their finger in and touch a wire, missing light fixtures, things like that. So anything that might affect health and safety, they want us to call out or call for repair. And they've actually gotten much more lax in the last several years. It used to be any cracked window we had to call out. Now they look at that and go, well, that's cosmetic, so we don't have to repair that. But anything that's blatant health and safety risk or issue, we're going to call out for repair.
Yeah, and I can even speak to we've had situations when you're talking about FHA where even concrete being raised at where trees are and the roots of raised concrete slabs. I mean, that becomes an issue too, right?
You bet. If it's a tripping hazard, it has to be pretty serious when it comes to the concrete. But yeah, we see driveways that are all, they can be 6 inches off in some areas. If it's a tripping hazard, if there's a high wall off of a step, if there's no railings around a high deck, things like that, they want us to point out and call for repair.
So kind of take us through the process. When you show up, what are like the first things that you do?
Yeah. So, typically when we call to set the appointment, whether it's through the agent, showing time system or whatever, we're typically, we're going to ask for a few things. If it is an FHA, a government-backed loan, we do have to look up in the attic. FHA requires us to do what's called a head and shoulders inspection. So typically we're going to ask somebody to have a ladder maybe have that access open for us so we don't drop all the insulation into your house, and maybe a ladder in there. But all we're really doing is we're going to come to the house. We're typically going to start on the outside. We're going to take photos around the outside. We're going to be looking at basic stuff, condition of the roof and the windows, and make sure there's no chipping, peeling paint. We're going to measure up the house. We want to get an accurate reading on the square footage, the livable square footage. And then when we come in, we're looking at several factors. We're looking at condition, quality of the features, the flooring, the cabinets, the countertops, things like that. We're building out a sketch. Most of us do it all digitally now, right on our phones or tablets. So we're building out a sketch. We might be measuring some areas on the inside and taking photos essentially of all the rooms.
So let's talk about measuring. So before you come to the house, I guess you're downloading the tax record, you're checking what they say that the square footage is of the improvement, the actual home. Yep. You're measuring outside.
Correct.
Not inside.
Yeah, at least for the footprint. So if it's a ranch style home, we're going to measure the outside footprint. And most appraisers are pretty good about taking into consideration brickwork and things like that, so we're not overstating square footage. But then if it's a multi-level house, if it's a standard traditional 2-story where the upper level is right over top of the main level, that's pretty easy. But where you have houses where the upper level is different than the footprint of the house, then typically we'll measure the second level from the inside.
And then do you add to that then based on what the building materials are? So you're still trying to get a complete exterior measurement, correct?
Well, the reason we measure from the exterior for the footprint is just that it's easiest that way to do. It's a lot easier typically than trying to go inside. Now, most of us these days, we use a laser measuring device, but back in the day when there's still appraisers that use some use a wheel, some will use the tape measure. But it's quite often just easier to measure the footprint from the outside. And no, once we start measuring inside, we typically aren't adding for building materials because we're trying to get an accurate reading of inside living area. So if anything from the outside, we might deduct or round down for some of those outside walls or brickwork or things like that. It's not required to, but we're trying to get as accurate a measurement of inside living area.
So what happens when, somebody builds an addition on their house and that's not reflected in the tax record, and you're expecting a 1,400 square foot house and you get there and it's a 2,000 square foot house? Is that, what do you do at that point?
Great question.
Are you making notes that maybe addition was made? And sometimes that means it wasn't permitted, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is a point of contention quite often. Usually the question comes up, people will wonder if we are turning the appraisal, the finished appraisal, into the taxing body, the assessor, which we don't. We're working for the lender. But yeah, essentially we show up to a house and the tax records are way off. Of course, we fix the sketch. We measure that addition. But yeah, many appraisers will start to question, I wonder if any of this is permitted, because it could cause problems later on for the new buyer if those improvements or additions weren't permitted when they were done.
So do you bring that up to the lender? Just kind of curious.
Typically, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Because
I see a lot of. Yeah, sometimes we do see that. So for people that have additions and you're thinking about selling your house, if you haven't permitted the addition, if you permitted the addition and it just isn't reflecting in the tax record, that's one thing. But a lot of times what we're seeing now is the lenders are coming back and saying, hey, we have another 1,000 square foot to this house of finished square footage. Why? And we do have to go back to the seller at that point. And a lot of times if they want to sell it, they need to go ahead through the permit process and actually make everything right, legit with the county to be able to move forward with the sale. So let's talk about how much, so one of the things that we know that you're getting and from a real estate, professional, it is a little frustrating. I have to be honest, because we know you guys have the contracts. We know you have copies of the contracts. Sure. And so, one of the things I like to ask Blaine, sort of right up front here is how much does that factor into your initial thought when you're entering that property, when you're looking at the contract? And nowadays, you're looking at, man, this list price was $300,000 and now the sale price is $325,000, whether there's cash back or not. How much is that playing into your, initial factoring when you're walking on that property?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just for, I guess, for setting the stage, the reason appraisers need the contract is Fannie Mae requires it. Fannie Mae says right in their rules that the appraiser is to analyze and summarize. Those are the two words they use. Analyze and summarize any and all contracts on a sale, because they want us to be able to see and weigh in. And now, why would this be an issue? Well, normally when I give a talk, I will ask everybody in the audience, usually when I'm talking to agents, how do you guys determine value, or who determines value? What do you think the most common answer is, Todd? Who determines value?
Well, I think the sellers are the initial ones trying to determine the value, but then the agent is either, supporting that or trying to, So well, the buyer, ultimately, I guess the buyer's that, the buyer is the ultimate one that determines what they'll pay for it. So that's the correct answer.
Okay. So that's the most common answer that agents will give is, well, buyer and seller determine the ultimate value of the house.
Right.
Well, if that is the case, and that is only one part of Fannie Mae's definition of market value, if that is the case, then we need to know what agreement the buyer and the seller have come to. And that's why we need the contract. Now, once we see the contract, is it going to sway our opinion of value when we go out there? No. Appraisers are really good at remaining as objective as possible. Of course, I don't speak for all appraisers, but that is our job, to remain objective. We're looking at the facts of the house, the condition, the quality, updates, remodeling, roof, windows, the whole 9 yards. And then the other set of facts that are going to help determine value, and the most important set of facts, and I know we'll talk about it, is the comparable sales. So in essence, it almost doesn't matter what the PA said or what the purchase agreement says. It's important for us to analyze it because it can play a factor. It is one factor, but it's not the determinant in an appraisal.
Yeah, and I can tell you that in this market, I mean, we just had a deal fall through where the selling price, or the agreed selling price from the buyer and the seller, was $35,000 higher
Yeah.
than the appraised value that came in. The deal ended up falling apart, but so there, I mean, there are checks and balances. Well, let's start talking about value, because a lot of us sort of wonder, how you're coming up with these values, how you're matching them up with comparables, and what really count. So does building materials, how much does that weigh in when you're looking at something, let's just say a 2,000 square foot house, and we're comparing a 2,000 square foot house, how much more is being added for, let's say, a brick front or a little bit of stonework, or, building the architectural shingles versus, just a 3-tab shingle?
Yeah, great question. So the most common questions we get as appraisers are, how much for this? How much for an additional bedroom? How much for brick front? And unfortunately, if we all had, a nice little laminated card with values, a bedroom is $5,000, but it doesn't work that way, because everything, as you know, is market based. So an additional brickwork, for example, as you mentioned, brickwork in one neighborhood may bring a premium where brick is expected in another neighborhood. So an appraiser's job is to always take into consideration what is considered typical and common for that particular neighborhood, to determine if upgraded materials are going to bring as much value as in maybe another neighborhood. There are some neighborhoods where upgraded materials are the expectation, and therefore, if you remodeled your kitchen with cherry cabinets and granite countertops, you may think this is great, but then we look at all the other comps. All the other comps had granite counters, so you were just bringing yours up to the market standards. So it really does depend on what is considered typical and common for that neighborhood.
And that's really important, because if you're renovating or updating your house and you're planning on selling in the next 5 or 7 years, you certainly don't want to do things. I mean, if you're in a vinyl siding neighborhood, by bringing brick, so what you're saying, Blaine, that may not matter.
Yeah, you and I know that buyers may pay more for that. And this is important to get out when it comes to the appraisal. I am not the person telling you necessarily what your home can fetch in the market. That's more the listing agent's job. I'm not necessarily telling you what a buyer is going to pay in the market. I am telling you what the market says. And by the market, we mean comparable sales. So essentially, appraisers are reporters. We are reporting only what the market data is saying about this type of house in this type of market. So new brick fascia, a buyer may say, yeah, I'd love that over vinyl, and I'll pay a little bit more for it. But if there is not clear market data available to the appraiser that's more valuable, it's very difficult to show up on an appraisal. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Absolutely. Let's talk about basements. This is the biggest, that we hear. It's true that it doesn't matter if there's even part of it that's below grade. It's all considered below grade. Is that correct?
Yeah. So essentially, from the front door up is above grade. If you take even 1 or 2 steps down from the front door, it's considered below grade in most situations. Yeah.
Right. So a lot of people finish their basements, and a lot of people spend a lot of money in their basements. I mean, they could spend $30,000 in the basement. They could spend $300,000 depending on the size of the house. Are they getting that money back?
Again, and we'll probably end up saying the same answer a bunch of times. Really depends on the market. Depends on the neighborhood. Do all the other houses in the neighborhood have finished basements and you're the last to finish yours? Then it's an expectation. Anybody looking at houses in that neighborhood is going to say, why isn't your basement finished? Finish the basement, I'll buy it. So it depends on what's normal, or what we say is what is accepted by your market. So let's go the next step. You finish off your basement, but you finish it like Elvis's mansion, and you put gold-plated fixtures, and you really do it to the nines. You think you've got the best stuff in there. Well, we might come into that and look at all the comparable sales and say, well, nobody wants gold-plated fixtures. This is called an over-improvement. And unfortunately, you just put too much money into your basement because there's no market data indicating that buyers are willing to pay what you put into it. So I would say the first tip always is research what is accepted in the market before you go hog wild on finishing off the lower level. You can put nice stuff in it, even nicer than maybe what's in the neighborhood. But if you're going to do it for your use value, do it for what you're going to get out of it while you're living there. And then the market will determine what they're willing to pay when it's time to sell.
So I know this is a tough question, but we just had Clark text in a question about basements. And I know it isn't a cut and dry answer to it, but
yep.
What kind of difference are you looking at with as far as below grade space, a basement, as far as a finished basement square foot value or an unfinished basement?
Yeah, Clark, thanks for the question. So again, this is really tough because there is no set square footage number for either above or below grade. For example, you go into a neighborhood where the houses are selling for $200,000. We're going to do some calculations. We're going to figure out how much those houses have depreciated, how old they are, what's the effective age of the house. And then we're going to determine a depreciated price per square foot for the above grade. And then we have to research and learn, okay, based on that depreciation level, it's called the discount factor. How much are we discounting the below grade square footage? So whatever the above grade square footage number is that we come up with, it's typically going to be considerably less for below grade. And that's typically because most people, they won't put as many dollars per square foot in their below grade areas. They won't necessarily put the same finishes. Most people don't have a kitchen, for example, in their basement. So they're not putting granite and they're not putting cherry cabinets and they're not putting the high-end flooring. They're typically putting, carpet or vinyl or something like that. Also, you have to consider that in most homes, 40% of the basement structure is already there. You've got the walls already built. You have a ceiling already. You might have to drywall it, but it's the floor for the next level. So the construction costs for below grade square footage are less than above grade construction costs. So I wish I could give everybody wants just a set number to use, and it's just not there.
Yeah. So let's continue with basements, because I do see a lot of times where, these basements do have kitchens.
Yeah. Sure.
Is that, a big add when you're talking about a below grade space?
Well, yeah, again, it depends on what buyers in that market will accept and what they'll pay for. I think you'd probably find most buyers would say, yeah, I'd love a second kitchen in the basement, but will they then pay as much as you paid to install that kitchen? Chances are slim that they will.
But if they do, Blaine, are you going to give the extra add to them to be able to get the loan? I mean, what we're finding is, we don't have a problem with finding the buyers that are, finding the value in the property right now. We're half the inventory we were a year ago. Still the same. We're in historic. Money goes a lot further nowadays because we're in historical low interest rates. And so we're seeing that people will spend the money. The question is, are you going to add the value to those kitchens that are below grade, the second kitchens?
Yeah, good question. And again, now I think this is the part that a lot of people don't see, the behind the scenes for an appraiser. Most people think the appraiser is the arbiter of value, the one giving value. It's always talked about that way. And again, as I mentioned, the appraiser just reports, but the appraiser also has, let's call them paymasters. The paymasters are the ones we are working for. We are essentially, on any federally related mortgage transaction, we're working for the bank. The bank is our client. Doesn't matter who has to pay for the appraisal. The bank is our client. It's the only one we can typically speak to regarding value on the property. The bank is very sophisticated. Underwriters have very sophisticated technology available to them, and they also have risk scores. So every appraisal and every loan runs through a computer system, and it will get kicked back with a risk factor or a risk score. And so quite often it is the underwriters, and a lot of people never see this part of the process. But let's say I go to a house, I'm appraising, it's got a kitchen in the basement, and I say, you know what, that kitchen's worth at least $5,000. And so I put $5,000 as a positive adjustment for that kitchen. Once it goes to underwriting, quite often an underwriter will review this, and they'll kick it back to the appraiser and say, prove it. Give me a comp with a kitchen in the basement, showing that people are willing to pay more for kitchens.
Now we're getting there. Yeah, now we're getting there. That's what I'm talking about, because what happens is we do get the buyers that will pay for the kitchen in the basement. They'll pay that extra $5,000, but the problem is the comparables don't have it, and we're trying to say, look, guys, it's worth it. So what you're saying is you have to find those kitchen in the basement, and if it doesn't exist, then they're discounting it. So guys, if you're putting, all these add-ons, I mean, it's really important, if you're thinking about, I can't say it enough, if you're thinking about selling, you have to watch the improvements that you're putting in, because you may not get it back. And so, and to keep on that same topic of basements, how about the bedroom in the basement?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, are people expecting, there's a couple factors to this. Are there only 2 bedrooms or 1 bedroom above grade? If there's only 1 or 2 bedrooms above grade, that 3rd bedroom in the basement becomes super, super important. Now, of course, when we talk about bedrooms in the basement, we're talking about they have to have a legal egress. The window can't be asking next. Yeah, the window can't be any more than 44 inches from the floor. You have to have 5.7 feet of net-free glazing area, window area. The window has to be able to open up a certain number of feet, and there has to be the ability of a child essentially to get out, and the ability for firefighters to get in the window. So there has to be a window well or a ladder getting out of it or something. But that's super important for it to be called a legal bedroom. Now, sometimes the question comes in. Let's say it's a little older house. There's looks like an egress window in the basement, but it's a little older. Standards were different back then. Appraiser goes in, measures it up, and goes, it's 52 inches from the floor, doesn't meet standards. Is it still going to be used by the buyer as a bedroom? Of course. Sure it is. We just have to call it a den on the appraisal.
Right, which is a big difference in value.
It could be. I wouldn't say a big difference, but there's going to be a slight difference because we can't call it a legal bedroom, but it's still going to get value on an appraisal. But it might be less value relative to a house with a legal egress window in the basement that we can call a bedroom.
Yeah. And so what about closets? Because I hear a lot of agents, they say, well, it has a closet. So is that when you're talking about, so sort of like in the 5.7 square foot of opening space, and when and I've built houses, and talking with the fire marshal, a lot of it is, people say, well, why do you need a big space like that to get in and out? Well, you have to understand a firefighter may need to carry somebody out.
Right.
So they may need to go in and grab somebody and get them out. So there has to be that. But I see a lot of times where people are calling these bedrooms in the basement. So the good thing to know here, straight from the appraiser, is they're considering this a den. So if you're calling that, if you have a 3-bedroom house and you're squeezing out that 4th bedroom because it looks like a bedroom in the basement and it has a closet, it may not be classified as such.
Well, yeah, let's clear up the closet myth.
Okay.
So typically, let's go the other way. You have a 100-year-old house, and you got a couple bedrooms, 3-4 bedrooms in the upper level. But you walk into that bedroom, and there's no closet. Is it not a bedroom now? No, of course it's still a bedroom. The standards were different 100 years ago.
Right.
So a closet is not required to call something a bedroom unless there's a caveat, unless buyers would expect a closet in that era of home. So if the house was built 10 years ago and you go into a room and there's no closet, then they're going to say, wait a minute, 10-year-old houses nowadays, bedrooms always have closets. This is clearly a den. There's no closet. But a closet is not required unless the market would require it.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I didn't know that at all. How about is as far as, and just kind of a flip side on that, while we're talking about basements, what about like condominiums that are on the first floor and they're partially under grade? Mm-hmm. How are they comped compared, valued to a second floor condominium? Is there a different way of calculating below grade or above grade with a condo?
No, it's totally different on a condo, because if you have condos that way where they're stacked, and all you're now choosing between is whether you want to be on the first floor, second floor, third floor, you essentially have the same floor plan just stacked on each other. So we're still calling it, with a condo especially, you're calling it gross living area, not necessarily above grade or below grade area.
Got it.
Then we're just looking for other condo sales that might be on the same level, and any market data to show if there's a price difference between levels.
Got it. So we have Sandy Joe Burns asking a couple questions here. So she just asked, what if it's the only kitchen and it's located on that lower level below grade?
Yeah. Hey, Sandy Joe, great question. So this would be like maybe a bi-level house or multi-level, where you walk in, you walk down the stairs, and boom, there's a kitchen there on the lower level. And essentially, this is okay. I mean, it's like if all the bedrooms are below grade, do you call it a 0-bedroom house because there's none above grade? No. You just have to explain. It's the appraiser's job to narrate in the appraisal and explain our rationale. What did we see in the market? Of course, if that's the case, we're going to try to find other sales that have that same layout. And if we can't, we just have to comment on it. We may have to adjust for it. If I'm going to use a ranch as a comparable sale, the ranch may show up in the market as a little bit superior, or have a superior, what we call functional utility. More people like to walk in and have the kitchen on the main level. Okay, that house may sell for $10,000 more than a house with a kitchen below grade. We look and we research and we find that, and then we make an adjustment. But it's absolutely okay to have those kinds of situations.
And we do have another question from Sandy Joe and Lorraine, and we're going to get to that shortly here because it's talking about something we're about to cover in the main living areas and with other comparable properties. So we appreciate those questions. Keep them coming, and we're gonna answer them really short in just a little bit here. Does it matter on a basement what kind of whether it's a walkout basement or a stairwell? Is there a different in value with that?
Yeah, for sure. And Todd, you would know as a former builder and developer that walkout lots are typically more expensive. There's more construction that goes into them. Daylight levels then maybe a little less expensive than a walkout. Full basement is probably one of the easiest because you're only pouring typically a certain number of feet of concrete and so on and so forth, and you don't have to pay for the windows and the cutouts and all the other stuff. So in terms of value, it's going to go full basement, daylight basement, walkout being typically the most valuable. You get more usable space.
Yes, but you're not just treating that as below grade. You're considering that and adding to it if the other homes in the neighborhood, the comps don't have that.
Typically, yeah. But again, most underwriters, let's introduce a term: bracketing. Most underwriters want us to do something called bracketing. What is bracketing? Well, just as it sounds, they want us to bracket most or all of the features of the subject house that we're appraising with comparable sales that have those features. So what they typically want is they want one comp that has less square footage and one comp that has more square footage, one comp that has a finished full basement, one comp that has a walkout basement, because they want to see in the market maybe what we're adjusting for. And if they can see that with a comparable sale, that houses with walkout basements tend to fetch more in the market, it's clear. Then it's not me just saying, hey, I think an adjustment is due here. Underwriters want us to prove our adjustments a lot of times.
So let's go ahead and touch on the main aspects of the main living area. So Sandy Joe had asked a question about when you're going through, and I guess this relates back to more of the safety issues. Are you noting whether they are the new required smoke detectors? The sealed battery, the sealed battery, help me out here.
Yeah, I know what you're exactly
it's hardwired. The hard, but not so much as just hardwired, but that they have that new sealed, tamper resistant. Thank you.
Tamper resistant. You bet.
Tamper resistant.
So I'm in Michigan. You guys are in Maryland. The standards can be a little different, and a lot of times it will default to whatever the state's requirements and standards are, and it behooves the appraiser to know what those are. Now, if it's an FHA appraisal or, again, one of those government loans, typically we're looking for two things in that regard. We're looking for a carbon monoxide detector and smoke detectors. Smoke detectors are supposed to be in all the bedrooms and outside in the hallway, outside of the bedroom, as well as in one of the main living areas like a family room or something like that. So it's really 50-50 if the appraiser calls for it, and it's going to come down to the lender. If the lender and the underwriter are always stipulating that we want to see this on an appraisal, you're going to see appraisers calling for it every time.
Yeah. So if you see, and where this comes into play, guys, is what happens is sometimes people are waiving inspections. And so now you're getting the appraiser coming in, and they might be asking for things that would maybe get picked up in a home inspection, or would be asked for, even though if you did get a home inspection and you didn't ask for it, you may end up needing it in order to get your loan. So we've got Lorraine has asked, what about 2-bedroom detached homes with similar square footage of a 3-bedroom home? And I get this question a lot. What is the value? Is there an add or a subtract from that? And before you answer that, I'll just say that I just had this situation where I sold a interior, wasn't detached, but it was an interior townhome, and we were comparing it with a 3-bedroom, and we were a 2-bedroom, and the appraiser did not deduct in this situation for that 3rd bedroom. What's your opinion on that? How does the value change if you have a 2-bedroom versus a 3-bedroom? What is the add, the subtract?
Yeah. And again, all I can keep going to is that it depends on the market. We have condo developments here in our area that have 2-bedroom units and 3-bedroom units, and the 2-bedroom units sell for considerably more than the 3-bedroom units, which is totally counter to what most people would think, that 3rd bedroom should bring some more value. However, the market is basically saying, maybe we're first-time home buyers, maybe we're the elderly, we don't need that 3rd bedroom. We're downsizing. We may not need the 2 bedrooms. So they pay more for the 2-bedroom home than the 3. And it would be true in your market too, is we got to research that. We have to see, does that 3rd bedroom actually matter? You have 3 bedrooms, but they're in the same square footage, Sandy Joe said. So we have 3 smaller bedrooms. Does that mean we're losing closet space? There's a lot of factors. And I think this too it happens behind the scenes, but a lot of people don't see it. Appraisers are doing a ton of research on markets, most good appraisers anyway. And every house, every neighborhood, and every market is different. In fact, we loosely use the word market all the time, but you and I know, Todd, that really there's thousands of submarkets in every one of our markets. The markets can change 2 streets away. And so it behooves the appraiser to have what's called geographic competency. We know our neighborhoods, we know our areas, we know where the values and prices change. We know where buyers want 2 bedrooms, and we know where that changes and they want 3 bedrooms. So it really does behoove agents and the appraiser to do their research and know, is a 3rd bedroom going to be more valuable?
Yeah, and Lorraine was just following up saying that, it's very hard to find 2-bedroom comps in those detached homes, and I would agree with that. So, which kind of leads me in, and I don't know whether Lorraine's an agent or not, but how much influence do we have with you guys? So, I mean, back in the day, pre-2008, I know that, it was like there was a lot more conversations going on. Let's just say that from the listing agent, because typically, just so everybody knows, the appraiser's not calling the buyer's agent. They're calling a listing agent. They're saying, how'd you come up with this price? Where in the world, how am I going to comp this thing? Give me some help here because, I'm not seeing what you're seeing. Where did you come up with it? So I guess the question is, Blaine, how much are we allowed to have in conversation with you nowadays? You're getting in typically by the listing agent, right? You're calling the listing agent, you're scheduling the appraisal, making sure you're clearing that. Some people have access with, the electronic boxes and go on their own, but how much interaction is allowed between the agent listing the house and the appraiser?
Yeah, great question. And this hopefully will dispel some myths as well. So after the crash, 2008, 2009, Dodd-Frank Act changed some things. And basically the myth spread, you cannot talk to the appraiser, can't have any conversations with the appraiser. Actually, what the rules say is that we are not supposed to have substantive communication regarding value with anybody who's motivated by a commission on the deal. Now, typically where that gets more specific is we shouldn't probably be talking with the lender about value, but we can have conversations with real estate agents all day long. As long as you and I, Todd, are not colluding on value, I can call you up and we have these conversations every day and say, Todd, I'm working on 123 Main Street. I'm struggling with comps here. Can you help me? Can you send me your CMA? Can you tell me what you saw? Am I missing something in this market? You're in it every day. Help me out, like you said. So we can have those conversations. Now, let me also clear up. You used one word first, and I want to make sure everybody knows. You used the word influence. How much can we influence you? You got to be very careful, agents. You never want to be accused of trying to influence the appraiser. You want to be as objective as possible. Offer your comps if you want offer your comps or your CMA. If it had multiple offers, share those multiple offers with us. That all helps tell the story. But you want to be careful never to cross the line and try and influence the appraiser.
Well, and I guess, depending on how I'm not talking about collusion, certainly,
right,
but when we see certain things, I guess the big question is, when does supply and demand come into play?
Well, supply and demand always comes into play, but people need to understand. And again, I'll go back to one of my first comments that the appraiser, let's clear up two words, worth and value. The appraiser's job is to opine or develop an opinion of market value. And they do this based on Fannie Mae's definition of market value, which I can share some of that with you. And we do it primarily based on comparable sales in the market. We call those our facts. That's an opinion of market value based on the data. That's different than worth. And I think that's where people get confused as they go, my house is worth way more than this appraiser said. And the buyer says, we think it's worth more than that too, and we're willing to pay more than that. Just like great grandma's ring might be worth $1 million to you, but to the market, it may only be worth 1,000. So worth is different, and appraisers don't necessarily report worth. We report market value because the bank wants to know, we're going to loan money on this thing. We're taking back an asset as collateral. Is the market going to agree with us if we have to take back that house and resell it on the market? And God forbid somebody gets foreclosed upon and the bank has to take back the house. Is the market value there for them to resell it? That's what they want to know. So we should dispel all the emotion from the deal and have buyers say, well, we think it's worth more, and sellers say, we think it's worth more, because you'll get somebody like me going, I absolutely agree with you. It is probably worth more, but the market value doesn't show it, and the underwriter wants market value.
So let's talk about calculating value through the comparable home sale. So you're basically looking at 6 months, right? 6 months of
there's no set hard and fast rule. The only rule that the appraiser has to follow is whatever is going to make that appraisal make the most sense. Now, with that being said, every lender has what are called overlays, supplemental overlays. They have their own rules and regs. They have their own template, whereby one lender may say, we don't want to see any comparable sales that are older than 3 months because the current market is so crazy and it's increasing that anything older than that, we don't want to see. I don't know any lenders who say that, but there might be some who say, don't go more than 6 months. But we put, again, if the best comparable sale in the neighborhood is a year old, and I can tell a story with that sale, let's say it's the neighbor's house, and it's the exact same model as what we're appraising. And if all I have to do is give it an adjustment for the market, how much the market has increased up to today from when that one sold, I'm going to use that comparable sale because it tells the best story.
Gotcha.
So there's no hard and fast rule. We just have to make it make sense to the readers of the report.
Yeah. So just explain to people, when you're doing comparables with other home sales, you're actually subtracting and adding to those comparables, not the actual house that you're appraising.
That's correct. Yeah. So the method, the science would call it, some appraisers say appraisers say that it's part art, part science. The science part is we are doing research in the market and we're finding out what the market would adjust for certain factors, an additional bedroom, more square footage, less square footage. And then we apply adjustments to the comparable sales to try to make them more similar to the subject. So if a comparable sale has an in-ground pool and the subject doesn't, we may subtract. Essentially, the rule is if a comp has a superior feature, we subtract. If a comp has an inferior feature, then we add an adjustment. So if the subject had an in-ground pool and the comp didn't, we might add a factor to that comp to make up for that in-ground pool.
And then those adjustments go in the report, and then that's how you balance out to show that that property that you're appraising actually is worth the money.
Correct. That's right. Yep. We're trying to pick the best apples to apples comparisons and adjust for differences.
So what type of, so I know, and just, I'll just say that I know that FHA and VA, I mean, they really have a different process. You could actually appraise a house for a certain price and they kick it back because they have in-house appraisers that don't agree with what you came up with, right?
That's almost true on all appraisals, even non-FHA, because again, lenders are
that
very
system you're saying now.
You got it. They have their own, they're almost like Zillow. The underwriters have their own printouts of potential comparable sales in the neighborhood. And quite often they will kick it back to the appraiser and say, please explain in the appraisal report why you didn't use these 5 addresses in the report.
Gotcha.
And then the appraiser has to research them and comment in the report why we didn't use them.
So I have a good question here. Lindy just chatted in. How much would a foreclosure bring down the home value of a remodeled home? That's a great question.
Hey, Lindy, thanks for the question. I would need some clarification from Lindy. Does she mean a foreclosure in the neighborhood?
Let me try and give you the example because we deal with this all the time. You have a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath home that was in, not the best shape. It went to foreclosure or short sale. And all of a sudden that property value now, let's just say it sold for $100,000 less than the house that you're selling or like to sell for that price. Mm-hmm. How much do you count that low, price, that transfer price? How much does that affect that comparable? And Lindy, I hope that's what you meant because I've dealt with this myself.
So the easy answer is we're looking for like-kind properties. We're looking for apples to apples comparisons. So if a house 2 doors down is that foreclosure that you're talking about, and the foreclosure is really nothing like the house I'm appraising, condition and quality-wise, I'm probably not going to use it. I'm probably going to comment in the report, hey, there was a foreclosure 2 doors down, but I didn't use it because it was inferior condition, highly motivated seller, and blah, blah, blah. But understand, we're looking for like-kind properties. So let's take that same foreclosure. Anybody who lived through 2008, 2009 knows that the term foreclosure changed in 2008 in that prior to that, if you saw foreclosure on a listing, it meant likely the copper was torn out of the house, the mechanicals were torn out, and it was going to be a real workhorse to get that thing up to code. After 2008, 2009, people literally just handed the keys over to the bank. They walked out of the house with beans still cooking on the stove, and the house could be in great condition. So if just because it's a foreclosure does not mean it's a good comparable sale. If it is a competitive property for you, Todd, to sell to one of your buyers, the question would be, would your buyer rather pay less for that house because it's a foreclosure and a stigmatized property than they would for the same exact property with a homeowner living in it? You bet they would.
Gotcha.
And if they'll pay less for it, it's a competitive property.
Okay. We have another question here. When we talk to our clients about different types, this is from Margot. When we talk to our clients about different types of flooring, vinyl plank levels, do you give different values for the actual materials used for flooring?
Hey, Margot, great question. So appraisers are always looking for condition, quality, those kinds of things. Differences between vinyl, I know what she's talking about, like LVP, luxury vinyl planking, things like that. We're typically looking at those things and we're noting them in the appraisal report. But again, the opinion of value on an appraisal is based on the comparable sales. And I think this is a hard concept for people to grab. It doesn't really matter what the house has. It matters what the comparable sales have relative to the subject we're appraising. So If the comparable sales don't have luxury vinyl planking and the market says that it prefers LVP, then yes, it will get
You're going to give an ad. I got you. That's great. Yeah, I think that's a a consistent answer, and I think that's good. So let's move right along. Let's talk about the report. So, well, before we do that, one thing I want to ask is, I know there are a lot of rehabbers, and we talked about distressed property, and there are a lot of people that go in and they're flipping these houses, and they're doing it sometimes beneath a 90-day window, within a 90-day window. Is it still expected that if you're selling you're buying something and selling it within 90 days and you're renovating, is it still a practice where you may end up with two different appraisals?
Two reports, yeah.
Typically. Two reports, yep. So what that means, guys, is if you're an agent and you're representing, one of these sellers, a lot of times they're asking the seller to pay for that second appraisal. So, if his appraisal is, say, $300 or $400 or more, but let's just say, you're working with that rehabber or you're rehabbing the property and you're putting that house on the market, it's a good possibility that they will ask you, that buyer will ask you to pay for that second appraisal report. I've seen that a lot. So just be prepared for that. Great to know that that's still in play. So the report comes out. Does it go to the seller?
Absolutely not.
Yep.
Bank is our client. Again, federally related mortgage transaction. The rules are no matter what, no matter who pays on the final cost sheet, the bank is our client. So even on page 1 where it says buyers Jim and Nancy Sue and the seller is so-and-so, the bank is the client. The bank is always the client, and there is a fiduciary responsibility between the appraiser and the lender to essentially have all vital communication between them only.
Yeah, by the way, if you're the buyer, you're paying for the appraisal.
You got it.
Unless it's the second appraisal, and then you're going to try and ask the seller to pay for it. All right. What happens when it doesn't appraise? Let's talk about rebuttals. Let's talk about the opportunity for the agent to, and we won't use the word influence, but, sort of stress how they came up, what was missing, does a improvement list help from the seller, quickly, because we've got about 8 minutes left, is there a chance of getting that appraiser to readjust?
Yeah, there's always a chance for sure. What I will always say is first and foremost, attack the appraisal, never attack the appraiser.
There you go.
Because the appraiser is never under any obligation to reopen a file. It is totally up to the appraiser because of the appraiser influence rules, appraiser independence it's called. So we don't have to open up the file. And appraisers are humans too. We may have different personality traits than agents, but we appreciate people respecting and talking nice. So attack the appraisal. There's two things you're looking for in an appraisal to reconsider it. One are called material deficiencies. Those are things that are factually incorrect on page 1. Hey, they said that we had 2 bathrooms. We actually have 2.5 bathrooms.
But what happens if we're not getting that appraisal report?
Well, you and I both know, Todd, that eventually somebody's seeing that. It's going from the lender to the listing agent it ends up in the buyer's agent's hands. And also important to understand that appraisers do not write appraisal reports for anybody but the lender. So quite often we will get calls from buyer's agents who just happen to have our appraisal on their desk, and they start inquiring about things in it. And the appraiser has to say, I'm sorry, but I can't speak to you about this. I didn't do that appraisal for you. And it also goes to that quite often people don't understand the appraisal language and the adjustments and all that other stuff. And the appraiser quite often will say, well, of course you don't understand it. We didn't write it for you. It's meant for a lender, lending standards. They're the ones who are supposed to read the report. Now, we try to make it as easy to understand as possible, but when it comes to rebuttals, you have to have better facts than the appraiser had in their report. And the facts in an appraisal report are always the comparable sales. So if you're going to ask an appraiser to reconsider their value, you better have better comparable sales. Cut out all the emotion. Don't send us the buyer's letters. They got a kid on the way and they're going to be homeless. It doesn't matter because the lender doesn't care. They want to know, are there better facts in the market, meaning better comparable sales than what the appraiser used? Those are your greatest chances of getting the appraiser to reopen the file.
All right. So come on, give us some tips. Give us some things to raise and boost those appraised values.
Yeah, well, NAR, of course, they come out every year. Realtor Magazine comes out every year with the top tips that you can do to raise your home value. And I don't know how they come up with it as some kind of magic number, but they always tell you if you remodel your kitchen, you get 86% back in. Well, how do they know? How do they know how much you're going to put into it? Maybe you're going to over improve it. Maybe you're not. What I would say is research your market. Go on Zillow, call Todd, have him do a CMA for you, but look at the interior of the homes in your market, because we want to be careful not to over improve. Over improvement creates one of the greatest disappointments if you're looking to sell. If you want to over improve because you want a hot tub in your basement, great, put it in there. Don't expect the market to pay you for that feature. So look at what the market in your neighborhood expects, and then go to that level. If you want to go to the next level, a little bit above it, great. You might get it back from the market. But there, unfortunately, is no scientific way to know what percentage you're going to get back from any investment in your home.
But you do recommend upgrading. I mean, you are looking at that, your basic opinion, you're determining whether, it meets today's standards and is something
Certainly.
that you would find in comparable sales. Know the market. Check out what your neighbors are doing. I mean, the internet's a great place right now because you can go on and actually see pictures from previous sold homes in your neighborhood and go to open houses. So you guys are, really considering making improvements and selling in the next couple of years. And Clark had also had asked, and I think we covered it, is it ever worth time involved to appeal, low appraisal value? We went through that. My personal experience in dealing with FHA and VA is good luck. You're not, your chances are you're not moving it. I have seen some success with trying to identify, hey, this wasn't right, or you kind of missed that. And then also, utilize, what I can say is utilize that opportunity when that appraiser calls you to say, this is how I priced the house. And guys, if you're real estate professionals out there, this is really important that you are making sure that you're comping it right, and that you can explain to the end of the day to these appraisers, because there's nothing more frustrating for a seller to get to the end of the rope, the line where you're getting that financing commitment, and that's at the last days. And sometimes you're a month or 45 days into this, the appraisal comes back, you're far away. Now you really have some upset sellers because their expectations were really high. And the buyer's agents, you guys got to do, that. You guys are professionals, that as well. You got to make sure that you're, giving them the best advice in putting those offers in. Donna asked, FHA appraisals valid for 120 days and possible to extend to 240?
Yeah, so the FHA appraisal sticks with that address for 120 days. The possible extension under certain circumstances, I don't know if it goes to 240. I think it adds 2 months maybe. And that would be in certain instances, military, and there's some other reasons that you might be able to get an extension. But essentially it does stick with that property for 120 days. Yep.
All right. Well, we're just about wrapped up here. I'll tell you what, Blaine Fine, thank you so much, man, for your time and your wisdom, and you're awesome. You're very respected in your marketplace. And we appreciate your time. And guys, we appreciate you watching and asking so many great questions. If you're, whatever your platform you're watching or listening to, if you like what you're hearing, if you would give us a follow or subscribe, share our content. We really appreciate that. We thank you for your time. And guys, we'll see you next week.